This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield. Thanks for joining me. 1 year after Donald Trump's victory in the 2024 presidential election, Democrats are still trying to figure out what to do for the next time around and what to do in the 2026 midterm elections as control of Congress is once again at stake. There were a lot of people offering advice to the Democrats in this regard. And certainly the most well funded of those people are the ones who say that the party has become too liberal and has to modify its stances to become more popular and resonant with public opinion. And at the same time, there are people on the further left side of the coalition arguing that the Democrats have become too conservative and that they have alienated people who want a more radical change in society to fix things that are broken and to be more active in favor of things like trans rights and abortion rights. Each side of this intra left debate offers points that really do resonate with the political science research. But also, each side has things that they should probably update their knowledge. And one of those is how media drastically impacts people's political opinions on many different subjects. And that is the central topic of my new ebook, What Republicans Know, which you can find the link to in the show notes of this episode. And I appreciate if you do click through and purchase that. Thank you very much. Someone else whose work you should consider in this regard is our guest on today's program. Dave Karp is an associate professor of political science at George Washington University, and he's written several books on the role of media and public opinion. And he's recently did an article in the New Republic that talked about a new report from a group called Welcome Pack, which purported to use data analysis to indicate that Democrats needed to become more moderate, but seemed to drastically downplay the role of media and its effects on public opinion. There's a lot to discuss here, so I hope you will enjoy. Theory of Change is part of the Flux Media Network, so go to flux.community for more podcasts and articles about politics, technology, media, and religion, and how they all intersect to create our culture. And if you are able to stay in touch with us, that would be great. We have subscription options on both Patreon and Substack. You can go to patreon.com/discoverflux to support us over there. And if you want to subscribe on Substack, just go to flux.community. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the like and subscribe button. That would be very helpful. Thanks a lot for your support. All right, let's get into the program. And joining me now is Dave Karp. Hey, Dave, welcome back to Theory of Change.
Okay, thanks for having me again.
Yeah. So this is you had a great thread on the Welcome Pack report, which I have to say is when I read that I instantly was like, oh man, these people like Welcome Back Cotter, a 70s TV series that
Has that
uh,
vibe.
it does. But in fairness to them, I do want to say that there are some things. There's a bunch of stuff in this report that's high quality and that does match established, well confirmed political science. And this is in my view the highest quality, more centrist leaning document that we've seen since 2024. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean when I opened this, the first thing that I noticed, they have a list of people that they're thanking, and it includes a number of political scientists who I know and deeply respect. It also includes a number of people who are immediate red flags for me. Nate Silver is on this thing. Like, Nate Silver was a great person to talk to 5, 10 years ago. Lately, he's mostly seems to be playing poker. So there were a couple of immediate red flags, but also there were a number of people who I was like, okay, if you're talking to Aaron Strauss and Chris Warshaw, I'm interested in what you have to say. And I think
Mhm.
they took seriously that they wanted to gather the data and see what it told them. I have some things that we can get into about what data they decided to look at and what they didn't decide to gather. But I think they at least took it seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were a couple of other red flags for me with it. Like they cited James Carville and their in their title page and a Republican pollster. How does that make you look better? I don't think that it does, guys. um, but nonetheless, there are some points in here that are true, and like one of the things that I try to do with my writing and podcast is to show the various factions of the left that nobody is 100% correct in
Mhm.
understanding elections. Like each side actually has viewpoints that are true, and each one has ideas that are false. And so there are a couple of things that are true in this report is that irregular voters are not ideologically committed
Mhm.
compared to people who are regular voters, and that's that's something that I think people on the progressive side might struggle with that concept of accepting. That it seems like.
Yeah, and the thing that I tell my students at the beginning of every semester is the answer to any question worth asking is, well, it's complicated. Um, and as a political scientist, that's where I feel comfortable, sort of exploring the complication. As a pragmatic strategist, well, it's complicated isn't a good answer, right? So the hard questions of things like, should the Democrats try to nominate more centrist or more progressive candidates? What people would really like is there to be a clean, easy answer to that. And that includes progressives who would really like to think that, when you nominate a bold progressive, they are likely to win. Um, and what the data shows is, well, it's complicated. There are scenarios where you're better off with a centrist. There are scenarios where you're better off with a bold progressive. In either case, it would kind of be nice to have somebody just dripping with charisma and lacking in scandals. But those people are few and far between. And so it's all complicated. And that is, I think, some of the use of a report like this is sort of reminding us that the simple story you'd like to tell yourself is also not quite true.
Yeah, absolutely. And and one of the other things that they noted in here that is true is that political donors or activists tend to have more polarized opinions than the general public or even their own co-partisans in their party. Now, the
Mhm.
Democrats, have a much wider range of opinions compared to Republicans, and so that makes things a little more difficult as well, in particular for them.
Yeah.
Um, and so these are real challenges that the Democratic Party. There are unique challenges that the Democratic Party has that do make things harder for them compared to Republicans. And
Yeah.
I think that that's fair. We have to say that.
We do. The bit that I want to quibble on there, because when I read that passage from them, I was annoyed, is if we start from the premise that politics is complicated and the answer to everything is, well, it's complicated, part of what that sets up is, like, I think it's okay for your party elites to be more interested in some issue portfolios than the mass public if the reason they're more interested in them, I'm thinking particularly of climate change, isn't because they're dyed in the wool ideologues, but because they're looking at it and having spent a lot of time wrestling with it, they say, well, no, this is really bad, and we as policymakers really need to care. Right? Historically, foreign policy is something that the masses mostly don't pay attention to, and so it's really important to have people in government who do pay attention to it, even if they're going to be out of step with the masses because the masses aren't tuning in. So to the like when you have elites that are out of step with the party base or the mass public that they want to get to vote for them. We're not out of step with them because they have sort of different ideological priors. That's a thing that we want to remind ourselves of and sort of check our instincts. But when they're out of step because they're more well informed, because they're the people who are actually paid to develop expertise and wrestle with the complications, like I think it's important to remember that like we run elections and win elections in order to govern. And a lot of the stuff that goes into governing is in fact going to be unpopular just because governance is complicated and a lot of it sucks.
Yeah, absolutely. And another issue where that's very relevant what you just said is the the issue of democracy, quote unquote.
Mhm. Yeah.
So the average person, I don't expect them to care about political systems and the Overton window and political theory. Like, no, that's they have better things to do in their lives than obsess over those types of things that you and I are thinking about. And so, but yeah, like it doesn't mean that they don't matter. And in fact, argue, I think we could say that climate change and democracy are probably the most important issues from an objective standpoint.
Mhm.
because they determine whether you have a future of the polity.
Right.
uh,
Well, and also, like, if the party, I'm particularly annoyed on climate, both because I come out of the environmental movement, but also because Matt Iglesias keeps on beating this drum, and I just think he's wrong. Like, Iglesias seems to have concluded that climate is a loser issue. Democrats should stop talking about it. Just assume that some technology will save us because it's a loser, so don't do it. Um, and I disagree with them that that's the route that they should take. But B, I would also say pragmatically, if you just let climate change keep getting worse in order to hopefully win some more elections in the near term, you're also going to end up living in a hotter, less safe, less stable world in the future where it is difficult as the governing party to keep on getting reelected. Like, the inattentive public is just going to blame you when things go wrong. So you should take governance choices that, in the medium and long term, hopefully make it less likely for things to go wrong. Otherwise, what's the point of democracy to begin with? And I just think some of these electoralists, or the like, they're calling themselves popularists now. Like, I think they seem to have forgotten that like, you don't need to campaign in prose. You can campaign in poetry, but if you're going to be trying to win elections, you then actually need to do the policy work that leads to a more stable and hopefully prosperous nation. Otherwise, when you do win, you're going to be governing in such a manner that, like, they kick you out next time.
yeah, absolutely. And that, I think, was one of the critical flaws in this report, is that they have a absurd viewpoint about that the public knows about issues and cares about them. And and the reality is, I mean, Kamala Harris, she ran her campaign and her policy positions to be maximally popular.
Yeah.
Like, some of the people who were financing this report were also financing and directing the Kamala Harris campaign. And so, like, we tried their idea, and we've tried their idea for the past several decades, and it actually hasn't worked. And like, the thing with Joe Biden in 2020, like, the problem with this popularist approach to me is that it's not actually popularist. It's not popular. um, and
Yeah.
like, and Trump won because people. Oh, sorry, Biden beat Trump in 2020 because Trump was really horrible, and he was a disaster. Like,
Right.
it wasn't that people thought Joe Biden was great and his policies were awesome. And that's the problem with these guys, is that they don't, like, it's Bill Clinton won because of Ross Perot.
Mhm.
Obama won not because of his strategies, but because he was a really good candidate who spoke really well. And so the problem that Democrats have is that you've got this consultant class that sort of glommed onto these two candidates, and like, they didn't, like, what happened to organizing for America? Nothing. Like, what happened to all of this local movement that they had built, that had arose around him? Nothing.
Yeah. Though one thing I would add in, particularly on Obama, is Obama also won because he was running against a Republican after two Republican terms when things were like, we both had foreign wars that had gotten unpopular and the economy imploded. Right. So, like, there is historically, there's what we call sort of um like a thermostatic or a sort of a back and forth phenomenon, where people tend to vote in presidential elections based on their opinion of the incumbent president or incumbent party. And it tends to go back and forth. Like, there's no world in which the Democrats win normal elections for the next, like, 40 years. Like, eventually Republican wins. And that it particularly happens once people decide, like, in political science, they call it, I think, the time for change model. I haven't looked at this letter
Yeah, I
closely.
was just going to say that. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. But, like, part of why Obama wins, it helps that he's historically charismatic, but it also helps that he is running against the Republicans after George W. Bush is, like, I think Republican Party approval was at like 20 something percent at that point, and John McCain
Yeah, Hurricane
was like, yeah,
Katrina too. Yeah.
yeah, like, and you had Hurricane Katrina, and then also the Great Financial Crisis. Like, of course, McCain didn't win that election. I'm pretty sure Kamala Harris could have won under those circumstances too. Like, there's some candidate quality, but a lot of it is actually the broader circumstances, which again is why they're like, sure, go ahead and campaign in poetry, but you need to govern in a manner that makes it less likely that objective conditions suck, because when objective conditions suck, then inattentive voters will just cast your party out, assuming we have normal elections, which I hope we have those in 2028, but yeesh. um I had another
Yeah.
thought. It's coming back to me. Yeah. Oh,
Oh, okay.
here's the other thought. um there's a turn of phrase that I coined for when I'm criticizing the tech barons, but is useful here, I think, which is the reverse Scooby Doo. Now, the reverse Scooby Doo is when you sort of imagine yourself as the villain in Scooby Doo and
Okay.
say, like, we would have gotten away with it if not for, insert thing. And we see this from the tech barons a lot, where like crypto, like Balaji Srinivasan, for a long time has like insisted that the entire economic system is about to collapse in 6 months and Bitcoin will rise.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If it doesn't happen, then it is, the government's fault for interfering. And so it's like it creates sort of a pressure release valve where he can loudly predict this and people can listen to him. Then when it doesn't happen, he's like, well, no, it was, I like included a reason why, like, I'm not wrong, even though it didn't happen. And with these centrist consultants, like, they talk a lot in this report about how Democrats need to talk about kitchen table issues, and if they just talk about it, then they will do better. And their evidence is asking the electorate, polling the electorate after the 2024 election, and finding that the electorate says, yeah, they don't really talk about kitchen table issues. They're mostly talking about, like, I don't know, climate and trans people. And so they then say, oh, that must mean that they talk too much about climate and trans people. They just talk different than would happen. But if you do a content analysis, it turns out that Kamala Harris was constantly talking about kitchen table issues. She was not constantly raising trans people. She was not constantly talking about climate. My God. Um, and so this idea that, like, yeah, they tried our thing, but like, if you just try it harder next time, like, surely it wasn't, like, even though she took our advice and we failed, it's somebody else's fault. That's always in there. To me,
Mm.
the lesson here is really the Democratic Party does not get to control what people's impression of the Democratic Party is. They had more control of that 20 or 30 years ago, when we still had the broadcast media ecosystem, and you would develop sound bites that would get played on CNN, right? Like, there was a logic of this stuff in the James Carville age that political consultants, including centrist political consultants, really had figured out. And they know that that doesn't quite work. They don't really know what's replaced it. But part of what's replaced it is social media. The other part of what's replaced it is, like, my God, right wing billionaires have bought up both all the mainstream media outlets and all the social media outlets. Like, the reason why everyone thinks that Democrats talk about trans people all the time is that Fox News and CNN and Politico constantly talk about what are Democrats saying about trans people. Oh, they're
Yeah.
defending their position instead of throwing them under the bus, or oh, they threw them under the bus. Let's talk about that. Like, 30 years ago, there were leftists who were like, oh, the problem is corporate media is controlling everything. And I was actually back then one of those people being like, it's a little more complicated than that. Like, give them a break, understand the rules of the game and play towards it. And now I find myself saying, like, oh no, like, Larry Ellison's son, David, just bought CBS and put Perry Weiss in charge. And now he's trying to buy CNN. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post and is now saying, no, I'm going to have a very strong hand in what it says and what it does. Like, the owners are now making very clear that they have an ideology and the press is only going to print that ideology. And they're also buying the social media companies so they can rejigger the algorithms. Like, if you follow every word of this report, the Democrats are not going to become known for the things that Deciding to Win or Welcome Pack wants them to be known for, because no one will hear that, because people aren't tuning in to watch your stump speeches. They're not reading the party platforms. They're getting incidental knowledge of the party from what they're sort of vaguely seeing in the background. And all that is getting set by a bunch of centibillionaires who like Trump, or at least want to serve Trump, and are buying up all the outlets. Like, you got to compete with that.
You do. Yeah, and that's one of the central points in my new ebook.
Mhm.
What Republicans know, like, so as from my own experience in Republican politics, th- they're just they have been so much better at politics, because and they have to be, because they're these reactionary positions are hated by most Americans. Like, most Americans want to protect Social Security. They want to have civil rights. They want to have Medicare. They want to have, they want to have jobs programs. They want to have education, student loans, and they want all these things, and they want to protect the environment. Yes, in fact, they do. Um, and so they've had to Republicans had to or reactionary Republicans after they took over the party really had to develop an infrastructure for themselves,
Mhm.
and that's something that in the U.S. left that just hasn't been done, and it's because as I have the graphs in the book that like the Republican ecosystem is circular. Every piece of it creates new inputs for the next step. So the activists are created by the media created by the parties, funded by the parties, and then the parties are funded by the donors, and the donors come from the activists.
Mhm.
And so, whereas in the Democratic side of things, they're blowing more than half their money on TV ads, local TV ads. Like, number one, young adults are not watching local television at all. Like,
Middle-aged
none.
people aren't watching like, it
Yeah,
is only my parents' generation are watching live television for anything other than Dancing with the Stars and live sporting events. Like, no,
yeah.
nobody just turns on NBC anymore.
No, no, they don't. And then even worse of this strategy, an even worse aspect of this strategy is that many of these local stations are owned by right wing billionaires. So
Right.
the Democratic Party is literally funding right wing media.
Mhm.
That's what they're doing, and they've
Yeah.
been doing it for decades now. Like if you add up all the amounts over the decades, like just since Obama, they have given Sinclair, Fox, and Nexstar more than $1 billion.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, what stands out to me is like, to me this is a failure of planning for the medium term instead of the short term. Because in the short term, I can understand you need to win an election. If the audience you're trying to hit is on local television, you got to go spend on local television, reach them. Like, go win the election because that's going to determine the shape of the next 2 years. And you do need to do that. The problem is that that's kind of only what they do. Like, the way that I remember sort of coming to this realization, since I've been in politics and organizing since the 90s. Like, I remember in 1998 people talking after the congressional election about how, well, we really need to build party infrastructure at the state and local level. And Republicans are doing that. They're running people for school board. We need to do that too. And everyone agreed, like, oh, yeah, we should do that. And then 2006, 2008, we're still having that same conversation as though it's a new conversation. And even at times, people would launch initiatives, and those initiatives would get some funding and they would get some interest. And those initiatives would last like 4 years, 6 years, show some results.
And even
But
Howard Dean, actually, to his
yeah,
credit,
I mean,
the
Howard
50
Dean,
state strategy.
right? He did it. So it's not that we've never even tried it, but when we try that, it doesn't last for very long because the impulse to defund that and put all of the money just into the short term thing means that we never build up that media infrastructure. We never develop that party infrastructure. Like, it just ends up being sort of a hollow party organization and hollow media outlets where, like, every 2 years they're like, oh, let's go find some social media influencers to talk to. Like, you need to spend a decade creating a pipeline so you can have your own Ben Shapiro's, and then eventually, like, try to have your own real equivalents of, like, CNN and the Washington Post, now that the Republicans have bought those too. That requires both a lot of money and a lot of commitment, but also a lot of time and planning up for the medium term or even the long term, instead of just thinking, what are we going to do in the next 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. And it isn't that there is not the money for this, though. That's the other thing. So, in the between the hard campaign direct donations and dark money groups, Kamala Harris had more than $2 billion at
Mhm.
her disposal. And the New York Times reported that she was getting so much money in that they were basically desperate to spend it. So
Mhm.
they were just literally buying any random thing that they could, advertising that they could. So they blew $1 million on the Las Vegas Sphere advertising, and they did drone shows, and instead of just giving that money to local parties and say, hey, this is for you to use for the next 4 years, any way you see fit, do it.
Right.
you know,
Now,
and that's the kind of time commitment that they need, and the same thing like with, like you mentioned, Ben Shapiro, like his Daily Wire website,
mhm,
that was funded by Ted Cruz's top donors, that they
mhm,
were directed to fund it, because they had basically maxed out as much as they wanted to give to him directly. So
mhm,
then the Cruz people were like, "Hey, go fund this new Daily Wire thing," and so they did, and
yeah.
they stuck with it, and it worked
Now,
for them.
part of the difficulty here is there is the money for it if we're counting what comes in elections. But I think, particularly since a lot of that money is small donor money, and small donors tend to show up only when there's an emergency and you need the cavalry, like the lack of like a handful of centi billionaires. Like I again, this is a like a dream from 15 years ago. But one of my dreams 15 years ago was, wow, it would be incredible if some of the old climate activists who went and started clean energy companies, like if they got exceptionally rich, it would be amazing to go to them and say like, hey, we need money for organizing and trainings, because they would get it because they used to do that work. Like if we could just have more good billionaires who understood organizing infrastructure and media infrastructure and valued it, then that medium term problem gets more easily solved. Whereas the challenge here is, even though there's enough money for it, if you could sort of hand of God apportion it better, like part of the challenge is that there isn't as much funding in between election cycles. And that's where it really hurts. That, it's like Michael Bloomberg will fund some stuff, but and like George Soros will fund some stuff, Pierre Omidyar will fund some stuff, but where you're talking about a handful of names who are usually single digit $1 billion. Bloomberg is double digits, I guess. Like the sheer aggregation of money, like towards people who were libertarians and so they invested in crypto 15 years ago and have ridden that wave, has just made it so that there's like the funding pie for people with large piles of money who will invest on a 10-year basis, I think has gotten more and more slanted in a way that just makes me depressed. Like it's not that it's impossible, but like the playing
Hmm.
field keeps on getting more tilted, while the need to do something about this, like to have donors
Increases,
back
yeah.
something in the long term, becomes more of an emergency.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a very realistic and important point to make. But and it does also indicate, though, the need for a more populist, rhetorical, and policy stance on the part of the party. I
Mhm,
mean, and that does, there is a big difference. Probably the biggest difference between the Republican ecosystem and the Democratic ecosystem is that the Republican donor class and activist class, they're not loyal to the party per se.
mhm,
They're actually loyal to their ideology.
mhm,
And so the Republican Party is their vehicle. Whereas the people who donate to the Democratic Party tend to be donating it to the Democratic Party, or as a charity, sort of, I'm helping civil society, so that's why I'm giving this money. They
right.
don't have a specific, and this is probably why, these more partisan type groups like Searchlight, or like, Welcome Pack, that they don't have, like, they're specifically trying to make almost a post ideological politics,
Mhm,
but that's not possible, and I don't think that they get that,
mhm,
because for the people who pay them, that's what they want. They absolutely seem to want that,
mhm.
but we don't live in that world, and maybe
Yeah.
we never did.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, if there's two things I'll grant. The snarky thing I'll say is there's always going to be money in telling large donors, hey, like here is a magic wand. If people just use these phrases or just elect these proper candidates, then we will all be saved. I'm going to share these insights with you. You're so smart, you'll get it. Give me money and we're going to get it done. And when it doesn't work, again, it's the reverse Scooby Doo, where they can say, it would have worked if not for those goddamn activists who got, now they're calling them the groups. Oh, the groups got in the way, but it'll work next time because we're going to get the groups out of here, and then we'll do it. Which is like they kind of want a smaller and smaller Democratic Party until it's small enough for them to control. And like, guys, that's not going to win in the mass elections. I'm sorry. So like, there's that bit, which is like mean of me, but I think true. The other bit, and here, like, I'll criticize myself a bit. Um, Donors do want, particularly rich donors, do want to hear a story that tells them, here's how we're going to win, right? Like, here is the realistic thing. If you give money to this thing, I really believe, and I can show you in a slide deck, that it is going to produce results and it's all fixable. Like, I am up in arms looking around at the current media system as it gets, bought out from under us, saying this is just going to make an already hard job even harder. And like, the easy solution there is we need liberal billionaires to start buying up media outlets too. And the problem is that there aren't any liberal billionaires, right? Like, there are some billionaires, but the other side has more money than we do. And so I'm left sort of calling attention to the problem. But if someone were to say to me, like, okay, give me a 5-step plan, and if we do it, we're going to win, I would have real trouble there, because realistically, like, realistically, everything's bad. And I can mostly just say, like, here are all the ways that everything's really bad. That's depressing. And people would rather hear the welcome pack people say, like, no, if we just elect moderate candidates in every district and never mention climate change or trans people or like anything else that, bums centrists who aren't paying attention out, then we'll win in a landslide totally. And it's like, guys, you're running, like, if moderates demanded that much, then Donald Trump wouldn't be the president. Like, the man bulldozed the East Wing of the White House during a government shutdown. And people are like, yeah, but I don't know, Democrats seem a little too liberal to me. Like, if Democrats seem a little too liberal to you when that's happening, what that's largely telling us is you're not learning about politics by closely watching the president and the Democrats. You're learning about it through a background information ecosystem, which is now wholly owned by conservatives.
That's lying to you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, so I agree with that analysis, except for the point about more money. So,
Mhm.
again, if you look at the Brennan Center's reporting and Open Secrets, there's actually more Democratic money. Now,
Yeah.
whether, but there is
They,
an asterisk. There is an asterisk in the, you know, Elon Musk buying Twitter for $44 billion doesn't technically count as a campaign
right,
experience. So
right.
expenditure. So like I grant that. So my point being though, like just in terms of hard campaign cash, Democrats,
Mhm.
because of a more engaged and fired up base, actually, the base wants to do big things. They would like somebody to offer them opportunities to give to something big. Lots of things. I mean, like we don't even have a Tea Party USA alternative. What the hell?
And we've got
And
Indivisible. That's not Indivisible's not nothing.
no, but it's not also not youth focused either.
Mhm.
Like, and I like, and I'll say, like, I like Invisible and I like what they're doing, but that can't be our only thing.
Mhm.
And and that is another core difference I think between the U.S. left and the right that I can see uniquely, having been inside both of them, is that in the right they believe in they don't believe in centralization except under the leader of the presidential leader. That's it. In terms of operational centralization, they don't do it.
Mhm.
So there's TPUSA, but there's also, 4 or 5 other right wing youth oriented groups.
Right.
And they are all out there doing things and they all have conferences and they're all giving people jobs and they're all helping people earn a livelihood. And then the same thing is true on the media. Like they're people who have money, they stick to their things and don't expect instant profitability out of them the way that Air America or Current TV
Mhm.
was. It they expect them to make a profit. Or you look at a lot of the left oriented media like Huffington Post or Daily Beast or Salon, or a bunch of these websites, they're owned by corporations.
Yeah.
And they're not necessarily, those corporations are not necessarily interested in our values. And so the grassroots, I think, would love a more directional oriented media, but nobody's presenting that to them, I think.
Mhm. Well, and I think there's some really great stuff out there. It is all characteristically small. right? Like the challenge, and part of the challenge is when it gets big, like if you have a media operation and it gets really big, then private equity might just decide to come and buy it from you for way too much money, right? And then we need like to have people who decide to say no to the big check and hope that they're not public, because if they're public then they can, get tossed out anyway. um, and these days, if you get really big, then the Trump administration might try to sue you out of existence in a court that has a judge who will just say yes to them, right? Like there's a thousand different ways that they can now try to weaponize the state against you when they get too big. All of which is very depressing of me, which is the reason why I'm a terrible person to bring to parties. But what I would say is like that doesn't mean that nobody's doing interesting things. It means that right now there's 1,000 pretty small, really cool flowers blooming, and the challenge of scale. What happens once you go from audiences of tens of thousands to audiences of tens of millions is that the challenges get a lot more difficult and a lot harder to see the way through of them, particularly when, I mean, it's been less than a year since Trump won his election, certainly less than a year of him being in office. Like things are falling apart pretty quick, and what we really want is good answers now. So like my technological solution to all of this continues to be time travel. I'm going to start a time travel company, make investments, because I think with a time machine, I'm going to go back to the 1980s, fix the tax code, and from that, boom, everything's getting better. But
Well,
lacking that technological solution, everything's like, it's not that nobody's doing good work, it's that all the really good work is too small for what we need right now, and it's hard to see how it's going to get bigger, at least in the timeline that we have.
yeah. Well, one of the other unique challenges I think of the left compared to the right is that the everybody on the left wants agreement on everything.
Mhm,
So and that I feel like to some degree that has harmed me sometimes in that I don't, especially particularly, line up exactly with any faction, and so
mhm,
that I get, people are get angry at me because I'm like, well, Gaza wasn't really much of a factor in 2024.
mhm,
But then at the same time, I'm perfectly willing to say that Welcome Pack, they should have polled about Gaza now, because everybody else who's polled on it has certainly found that a majority of Democrats, think that Israel has committed a genocide, and that they should have their aid cut off. So like that's a report supposedly about the Democratic coalition. Probably should have polled on that one.
yeah.
Kind of bad that they didn't. But aside from that, though, like there's just like in the Republican side, as long as you support Trump,
Mhm,
they will let you debate anything else inside of the coalition. So
mhm,
they like, I mean, as we're seeing right now, as we're recording this on Halloween, that the Republican Party is having an active debate right now whether to have an open Nazi, Nick Fuentes, in their coalition, and whether it's okay to associate with a Nazi. Like that's the level of extreme openness that they have. Now, obviously, we don't want to have Nazis in our coalition, open Nazis. But at the same time, if somebody has a different viewpoint from you on taxation or on any given issue, you probably shouldn't try to throw them out on their ear, because they don't 100% agree with you. And Republicans seem to get that better, I think.
yeah. So I'm going to push back on that a little, which is that premise of so long as you 100% back Trump means that like nothing else matters. Like the reason why they can debate should we let Nick Fuentes in like into the party in good standing, and it seems like they've just come down on yes, which like I'm aghast by, but also not entirely surprised. But the reason why they can do that is because like they can disagree about everything so long as they all agree that whatever Donald Trump says today is what they believe on whatever he's decided matters. Like besides that, they're just sort of arguing like color and shade preferences for the drapes, right? Like if
Well, they
if
don't have policies. I think that's fair,
right, so
generally
like
speaking.
Democrats can disagree with each other. Like I'm a basketball fan, and I really don't like the Boston Celtics, and I really like Boston Celtics fans to know that I do not like. I find their team to be morally reprehensible. Like I like to make a big deal about it. The Democratic Party coalition obviously includes me and Celtics fans, despite me finding that objectionable, because in every way that matters, my disagreement about basketball like is meaningless. Like that's just like ways to pass the time. And the Republican Party coalition, because we've seen it over the past decade, right? Like one of the most important differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2 is Trump 1 still had people who disagreed with Trump, right? He had like members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who said, no, we're not going to have our like military try to fire on protesters or like
Yeah.
domestic protesters, right? He had, John McCain turning down his signature healthcare bill. So like he had a number of people in the party coalition who were not the Trump faction. And in the intervening years, like I remember during the Biden years, one thing that I was yelling about, and I was in retrospect quite right to yell about it, to be mad about it, was they drummed Liz Cheney out of the party, right? Like she's running for reelection. She couldn't even use the WinRed fundraising system when she was running as an incumbent for reelection because they had decided you are a critic of Trump and that means you are not actually a Republican, despite being Liz Cheney. That purification, once they have reduced the party coalition to just like aggressively positive Trumpists, they can disagree about everything else because everything else doesn't matter. Democrats can disagree with each other on stuff that doesn't matter, but what makes it hard is that since we still care about policy, there's so many things that matter, and that makes the disagreement like much harder. And also, let's be honest, within the party coalition, many of us can be total assholes about it, which is also not great, but how it works.
Yeah. I mean that nihilism that Republicans have definitely it can be an advantage for them,
Yeah, like
but I
if the
think it also
Democratic
can
Party
be a
was a cult,
disadvantage.
a lot of
Yeah,
things would be easier. Like the problem is we would be a cult, but it would be a lot easier. Like if all of us were just devoted to one dear leader, then
yeah,
many things would be simpler. The
yeah,
problem is we would be devoted to one dear leader, and that would be very bad and also makes it hard to actually govern effectively. But lots of
yeah.
simplicity, sure.
Yeah, well, that's true, and but at the same time, yeah, like at the same time, just airing these disagreements, I think that's what doesn't happen, hasn't happened in the left side of the aisle. That a lot of
Mhm.
people, will have this idea. Well, so and so has a different view about this, so therefore, I won't allow them to be on my podcast, or I won't,
Right.
quote them in my story, and that's not acceptable, and it's certainly not a way to resolve your differences, and to grow the party, because again, like if you're trying to cast out people who disagree with you, then you're going to end up with a very small party eventually,
Yeah.
and so that's where I would say that we don't have to say it doesn't matter, these disagreements, but we have to say, look, I am entitled to my belief and you're entitled to your belief, and but we're united in trying to stop authoritarian, Christo-fascism,
Mhm.
and that's the like that negative polarization, I think, is, or negative partisanship is, that's a very strong component that the Republican Party has, and I think that has to be imported more and taught more within advocacy media on the left, because I think to a very large degree, whether it's with Welcome Pack or when you read Jacobin or these other ones, like in their viewpoint, almost all their content that they're directing is attacking the other side of their party coalition member,
Right.
and like that's not how you win. You don't have to agree with them, and I would also say, like, with regard to campaign effectiveness strategy, when what we're seeing is that being effective and working hard and being quick on your feet with social media and saying yes, these are not ideological viewpoints, because Zoran Mamdani is doing it very well in New York, but also Gavin Newsom's doing pretty well on social media as well. So like, and people are liking what they're seeing, from him and Pritzker. And so ideology isn't the barrier here. I don't think
Mhm.
it's competence and openness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's still an element. To me, there's a shift. Like competence has always mattered. The bit that matters more, I think, like Pritzker. I talked to some about Greg Sargent about this yesterday. Pritzker really, I think, of all the governors, understands the assignment, and that's both because he's standing up for values, but also because he's standing up for them in moments that will actually extend beyond the attentive public, right? Like he made a demand of Christy Noem saying, "Can you have ICE take the weekend off of gassing our children for Halloween, so they can go to their Halloween parades. And then she was like, no, absolutely not. We're going to be out there. And like that then becomes a story. And I think sort of figuring out how to craft stories for this moment when all of media is fracturing and collapsing is, I think, the new challenge. Whereas like you're right about competence. That's also sort of like when I teach classes on this stuff, the first half of the semester is the evergreen stuff that would have been true in the 90s and is still true today, or was true then and is true now. And then the second half is all the stuff that has gotten weird and new now. And so I think that there's a bit there of like the competence part has always been important and always been difficult. And then there's some new difficulties that we don't really have figured out.
Yeah. Um, well, and to that point, one of the other challenges, I think that there's a real divide between democratic political operatives and political scientists, I think,
Mhm.
because democratic strategists like to say that they're data driven, but when you look at the things that they write, and like and I'm not, this welcome pack report is one of many examples I could cite, but just putting a bunch of polls in a document, like that's not data analysis. I'm sorry to tell you guys, that's not how this works. And like, and so after this, I mean, a couple of the New York Times tried to say, well, moderate candidates do better, and here's why, and they just keep getting lacerated by
Mhm.
actual data scientists. And it's just like they think that they're doing data, but it's not data. Because if you're not understanding the ultimate cause of something, then when you poll about the proximate cause, or you're relying on self-identification, like
Yeah.
within social science, self-identification is like several steps down from what is a good indicator of somebody's behavior or somebody's opinion. And I don't see these things being known in
Yeah.
democratic politics.
So I have two things to say. One is, yes, I agree. Like, there's definitely an element to this report of like, they get enough correlations that if they like group together enough correlations, they can be like, oh, causation. And it's like, guys, that's real.
No.
I think I'll say in their defense is like the political scientists who lacerated that New York Times report. That's Adam Bonica and Jake Grumbaugh. And I'm a mid-tier political scientist. Like my PhD is in political science. I am a tenured professor. I'm pretty good at the stuff that I do, I think. Like Jake Grumbaugh and Adam Bonica are so much better at this stuff than I am. So it is like the thing I want to say in defense of the political practitioners is, this is like saying, oh, you think that you can play basketball. Well, there's Victor Wembanyama. It's like, well, you can't play against him. Like, no, you can still play. It's just some people are extremely good. Like those two guys are so fucking good at data and like serious data analysis that takes causation seriously in ways that I can read and understand, but like I couldn't pull that off either. And like I'm an actual political scientist. I'm so impressed by those guys. So like I do want to note that like these guys are going up against world-class political scientists, not just sort of like everyday like Dave Karpf of the world. Like when I can wreck your data analysis, that's really embarrassing for you. When Adam Monica wrecks your data analysis, it's like, you went up against a pro. That happens. Um, and like also the critique of political scientists is we can do tremendous data analysis focused on causality and often are left with very little practical to say about, well, here's the thing that you actually need to do today. Like my career has mostly been about trying to bridge those two worlds and understand the serious data analysis well enough to be able to say, here's the practical pragmatic stuff to focus on, or sometimes just saying there isn't anything to focus on. They're right, but you can't do anything about it. So like that gap is there and it's real. But yeah, also there's a bit of play acting in this report where like there's a lot of charts to really impress you of how much data they gathered, and it's like these are all correlations that you decided to look for. You're missing all the hard stuff.
Yeah, and there's plenty of other correlations somebody could find too
Yeah.
on the opposite side. And but it does. I mean, speaking of really good political scientists, so Lee Drutman has weighed in on this report as well. And one of the
Cool.
things that he had said was that that when you look at the variance between a House candidate and the presidential race in their district, and a
Mhm.
Senate candidate and the race in their district, what you find is that 98% of all House races have the same margin outcome
Mhm.
as the presidential race in their district. And 91% or 92%, I forget which one, of Senate races have the same outcome as
Mhm.
the presidential race in their district. And so, what this means basically is that the larger political environment is so baked in
Yeah.
that campaigns mostly do not matter,
Right. Yeah.
is what this means. And so if you actually really, and this goes back to what we've been saying in this with regard to media effects in the environment, is that to really have a large agenda setting viewpoint to actually massively change America, you have to focus on the bigger picture, because telling candidates to say this or that, it just doesn't work. And the
Right.
numbers are there that it
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the when I was in grad school, the big debate in this field was, do campaigns matter? And the outcome of that was they do, but only at the very tiniest margins.
Yeah.
And we now live in an age where elections tend to be razor thin, and so campaigners can say like, yeah, but the margins where the power are, so let's pour all this money and energy into doing it. And then Lee comes along and says like, or you could change the entire electoral system and make it not so stupid. And he's right about that. And I coming along and saying, maybe worry about the media system because that's a dramatic effect going in the wrong direction. And that's right. But if you say to Lee like, "Great, how are we going to do that this year?" Then his answer is like, it's going to take longer than a year. And if you
It's
would ask me like,
complicated.
"Oh, how are we going to do it?" Well, I need a time machine, which is like, right, kind of funny, but not at all helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, like in the like, if you want to fix democracy, you're not going to do it with just the right candidates saying just the right stump speeches. Like we know that's not the case. So like again, my takeaway is not like, oh, they're wrong. You need to do leftist candidates up and down the board. My takeaway is like, my God, stop talking about stump speeches and party platforms and just the right candidate profiles. There are all these bigger things that matter more. We need to actually pay attention to them.
Yeah. Or to put it much more crudely, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah, really
Or
hate this.
rather, change the game. Because like that I think is the like it was very damaging that the and I have nothing against him, but Sasha Eisenberg's book, The Victory Lab,
Mhm.
it excessively valorized the opinions of people about these campaign operatives and made people think that they were more expert than what they were. Because because while we can have actual data
Mhm.
about politics, especially in the presidential realm, the n is so tiny that
Right.
really there's nothing you can say about it that with any real confidence, and so so there really are limits in terms of what data can give you and what you can know from it. And that so
Mhm.
and that's the difference between the analogy that was Moneyball for baseball, that this is
Mhm.
politics is Moneyball. Well, no, it isn't, because in baseball you have the rules, and that's it. And you have to play with the rules. There's not going to be another base added. They're not going to let you have two pitchers. They're not going to let you have two batters to hit the same pitch. That's not happening. But guess what? In politics, you can change the rules, and that's the difference between having this fake. It's like I call it data mirages, essentially. That they're chasing data mirages. And it's not to say that nothing is possible or nothing is real.
Mhm.
It's to say that changing the shape of the river matters more than chasing the current. That's
Yeah,
my 2 cents.
so I do want to say I have always loved the Victory Lab. I still teach the Victory Lab. I think like I like Sasha's book a lot. I
Yeah, I have
now
nothing against him, but yeah.
Yeah, and but like the thing that I agree with you on is I now teach it as a moment in time to sort of explain like there was a like I think he was accurate to the time. At that time, many people, including myself, really believed that we are bringing science to campaigning. It's it is the data scientists against the James Carville, to like bring us back to the beginning, to bring it against the James Carvilles of the world. And having data science on your side, like running these experiments and A/B tests and everything, is gonna matter. And it's not that you shouldn't do A/B tests or experiments anymore, but there's a humility that's set in the past 10 years of, oh, even if that's helpful, that's helpful within some strict limits, because the party that does that more is not winning. They're not necessarily winning all the close elections, and all of their findings end up being time bound, right? Like the thing that worked really well in 2012 doesn't necessarily work well in 2016 because of the changing media environment or some other changes to the environment. So like I do love that book, Sasha. If Sasha happens to be listening, like, man, still a real fan. And also, like, it's a book that when I teach it, I have to sort of explain to students, like, this is what it was like in 2012.
Yeah. Yeah, and so and again, it all comes back to the low number of ends, and so
Yeah.
there are things that we can deduce and things that are true within an iteration,
Mhm.
but whether they're true across iterations, all bets are off, and you
Yeah.
shouldn't make any.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so and that's that I don't know, excessive faith in data, like that is something that you did. So you had a blue sky thread responding to the Welcome Pack report,
Mhm.
in which you also converted into a New Republic article. So I mean, in terms of, are there specific points from the report that we haven't covered here yet that you think we should on this
No,
discussion?
I think we've hit the big points, right? Like, the main thing is, if you just read their executive summary, they are stating up front that what they want is more moderate candidates who deprioritize climate, trans people, like social issues or social identities, and instead talk about sort of bread and butter, kitchen table. They want the Democratic Party to be anti-elite, but not in a way, and like anti-corporations and rich people, but like not sound at all socialisty. It sounds very sort of blue rose coated, like popularist, figure out what phrases sound good to people and then say them a lot, and just wait for everybody to then like you. And that's a model of politics that imagines that the public is paying attention to you like they are in their focus groups. And that model is just not the way the world actually works, right? Like, people's impression of the Democratic Party does not come from your stump speeches or your platforms. It comes from their incidental information that they're getting through their social media streams and, like, rant TV on in the background. So, like, at some point, it just really bugged me, this report. It's not, again, like, I don't want to engage in the fight over, like, should we be sound more leftist or more right. Like, I think that's the wrong argument to be having, and it's kind of the easy argument to have, is fighting over, what words come out of the party's mouths. And instead, I really think people need to have the harder conversation about, how do you build up infrastructure to actually compete in a world where the other side has an infrastructure advantage that keeps on getting bigger.
Yeah, well, because ultimately your message doesn't matter if no one can hear it.
Yeah. If no one can hear it, and if instead they're hearing, like, Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes characterizing your message, then it really doesn't matter what words you decided to say. People are going to hear their version of your words.
Yeah, and in many cases doesn't even require your words. Like that's the other thing that I think that the popularists do not get, and when they downplay media, because as we saw with in 2024, that JD Vance forwarded a complete lie about
Yeah.
Ohio, that people were eating cats and dogs, that immigrants were eating cats and dogs. This was not happening, and obviously the Democrats were not in favor of people eating cats and dogs. None of this had anything to do with either the Democrats or reality,
Yeah.
and yet it was still something that Republicans were talking about constantly, and using to mobilize their party. So this it is, infrastructure matters in this day and age. It matters so much more because there is no central media node anymore. The mainstream media is irrelevant to most Americans. Now they might be sort of the grist for the mill that all of these, so like Joe Rogan, or any of these podcasters, or even Fox, like they constantly are like, oh, the New York Times did a report about X. So like but it's just grist for their mill. Like they're not telling you what the Times said in their report.
Mhm.
So fixating on what the Times says in their headlines about this or that, it's not really going to help very much, I don't think. Like, if you're really upset about the times, then you need to be bankrolling more media. That's what you need to do.
Yep.
All right. Well, man, actually, I'm surprised we actually hit this so tight, Dave. Uh, Let me see here. Surely, okay, I'm going to obviously cut this part out here. So, um, uh, oh, okay. Actually, let's maybe end on.
Mhm.
Um, so, just to circle back to something in the final segment here, as we wrap up, I want to go back to something that I raised in the beginning, which is that the activist and donor class of each party has different priorities than the public does. And that this is another reason why you have to spread your message. Like, I think there's a significant advantage that Republicans have, and this is wasn't mentioned in the Welcome Pack report at all, which is religion.
Mhm.
You know, Republican religion is their local organizing
Mhm.
method, and that's, the indivisible is absolutely great, but I want, like 5 or 6 things that are out there that are like them, and that are targeting different groups. And to people's credit, like, people are having to do this with regard to like ICE watch things, and some people are raising up mutual aid organizations, but like, these things would work a lot better if the political class of the Democratic Party would get behind them,
Yeah.
and people would really love it. Like, we're talking about right now with the shutdown. Federal SNAP food benefits are Trump's going to cut them off. I mean, it would be so incredibly useful if there was money that had been set aside that could have just been used to give to families to feed themselves, and to and then give them a pamphlet or something.
Yeah. What it brings to mind is an old saying, which is that every problem is an organizing opportunity. And that's sort of like a gallows optimism note to end on is, if nothing else, 2025 and I expect 2026 are chock full of organizing opportunities because everything is getting worse, right? Like, turns out federal workers are probably going to need to go to food banks because they've shut down the government for a month, and he seems to show no interest in opening it back up. That's an organizing opportunity. We would rather have fewer of them, but the least we can do is try to build organization that can then serve as counterpower.
Yeah, and absolutely. And, like, as Republicans attack civil society through that's government run, there's an opportunity to step in and make it more explicitly ideological civil
Mhm.
society organizations.
Yeah.
And, and the same thing's true on the internet. As these billionaires are, actively trying to enact dead internet, that's an opportunity for small communities and for people to create the cozy web, as my friend Venkatesh Rao calls it.
Mhm.
And I think that's right. Like, this is an opportunity for cozy web politics, but
Mm.
it still sucks. Like, I'm not going to say it doesn't,
Yeah.
but I think this is the only way forward.
Yeah. I think that's right.
All right. Well, it's a conversation that we'll have to be thinking about that in the days, weeks, years, etc. to come. So, but
To be continued.
yeah. All right. Well, good to have you back, Dave.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. So that is the program for today. I appreciate you joining us for the conversation. And you can always get more if you go to theoryofchange.show, where we have the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And if you like what we're doing, we have free and paid subscriptions on Patreon and also on Substack. If you want to subscribe on Patreon, just go to patreon.com/discoverflux. And if you want to subscribe on Substack, just go to flux.community. And if you're a paid subscribing member, thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate it. And if you can't afford to subscribe right now, that's okay. But you can help out by tweeting the links or And if you are unable to afford a paid subscription right now, that's okay. Appreciate your help anyway, for staying in touch. And you can share the episodes on social media and like them when if you see me posting them or somebody else. That would be really helpful. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the like and subscribe button so you can get notified whenever we post a new episode. All right, so that'll do it for this one. I will see you next time.